For those of you joining us across the continent and around the globe, we thank you for joining us. Let's take a sneak peek at other stories making headlines. In business, South African gold production falls by 14% in November. And dwindling coffee prices raises concern among Ethiopian farmers. Let's begin with an update on the attack in Nairobi. And security agencies are saying that at least one person has died and several others were injured in an attack on an upscale hotel and office complex in the outskirts of Nairobi's CBD. Security agencies are currently in an operation to flush out gunmen holed up in the building. Unconfirmed reports say one gunman has been shot dead and 2 suspects arrested. Earlier on, police responding to the attack helped evacuate people from the complex, which has a hotel, banks, and several other offices. Kenya's Inspector General has called for calm. Well, some of the victims were taken to the Kenyatta National Hospital. CGTN's Bro Oro has more from the facility. Let's take a listen.
The number of casualties linked to the Riverside attack right here in Nairobi has not yet been confirmed. However, we were informed that 4 of the 10 who were shipped to various hospitals to receive care are right here in Kenyatta National Hospital. Of those 4, 2 had clear gunshot wounds and 2 had general injuries and were undergoing serious medical checkups to ascertain the extent of their injuries. Even as we are waiting here, rescue efforts are still ongoing at the scene at the Riverside, where security forces and first responders are on the scene seeking to end the aggression. This attack comes just a day after a court ruled right here in Nairobi that 3 suspects linked to the Westgate attack in 2013 should be brought to court for justice. Beryl Oro, CGTN, Nairobi.
All right, let's get you more from CGTN's Abdulaziz Billow, who joins me live from Mogadishu. Abdulaziz, thank you for joining us. Well, first and foremost, Abdulaziz, some reports say Al-Shabaab has claimed responsibility for the attack in Nairobi. What can you tell us about this?
Well, you're right. Militant group Al-Shabaab, in a brief audio recording that lasted less than 2 minutes after the attack, the group claimed responsibility for that complex attack that's still ongoing there in Westlands area of Nairobi. Now, in that audio recording, what we can be able to include in this bulletin is the fact that Al-Shabaab said that they are responsible for this attack and that they staged it in the same vicinity, the same district that they staged the previous attack, that is Westgate Mall. They're saying the attack primarily targeted diplomatic bases and high-end hotels and offices in Nairobi. So they're claiming responsibility for this attack, and they're saying that they attacked it at a very, very strategic time for them, as Kenyans were marking the 3rd anniversary since another attack on Kenyan forces here working in Somalia were attacked by militant group Al-Shabaab. So it's a deadly attack on the end on that side, but then again it's Al-Shabaab's ever-increasing tactics, because just 2 months ago they launched a similar attack here in Mogadishu, a complex one targeting a fortified hotel, killing 52 people. So this is the first attack to happen in Kenya of this magnitude, apart from Westgate Mall that happened in 2013. So for now, Al-Shabaab is saying that the attack was deliberate and that the main aim of the target was to inflict casualties and to ensure that the anniversary of El Ade is marked by another event of similar magnitude that is happening in Kenya. So it's quite unfortunate that such a kind of attack happens in Nairobi, Kenya. But then again, Al-Shabaab has been known to carry out such deadly attacks also in Somalia. Okay.
Abdulaziz, picking up where you left off, it's by regional troops.
Well, the role of the regional troops are primarily Djibouti, Ethiopia, Kenya, Uganda and Burundi. They've been able to assist previous and the current administration in Somalia to push out Al-Shabaab from its strongholds in the country. When AMISOM was first deployed to Mogadishu, Al-Shabaab controlled virtually 70% of the capital city of Somalia and a vast majority of rural areas and major urban centers also in south central Somalia. So the role that has been played by regional troops from the African countries who are part of AMISOM has been very, very influential and has assisted the Somali government for the first time in almost 3 decades to expand its reach in areas outside major cities like Mogadishu. So the role also played by specifically Kenyan troops in southern Somalia has been very, very commendable. They've been able to dislodge Al-Shabaab from Gedo region that is also on the border with Kenya, and also middle and also lower Juba region, which was the breadbasket of that region and a major financial lifeline for the militant group Al-Shabaab. So African Union troops have done a commendable job in fighting Al-Shabaab, but one thing they've not been able to address is such kind of guerrilla attacks that constantly happen in Mogadishu, where Al-Shabaab continues to carry out deadly assassinations and also carry out deadly bombings in major hotels and major government installations. So African Union troops have done a good job, but then again more needs to be done.
All right, Abdulaziz Billo, thank you for that report. That's Abdulaziz Billo reporting live from Mogadishu. Well, moving on now in studio, let's get more on these unfolding events in Nairobi. I'm joined here in studio by Dr. Mustafa Ali, and he's an international security expert. Doctor, so glad to have you in studio.
Thank you.
We have lots of questions. Hopefully you can unpack them for us. First and foremost, Kenya has not experienced a major attack for a considerable amount of time. What do you read from Tuesday's security incident?
Well, thank you. First of all, our condolences to the bereaved and those who have been injured. Kenya has tightened its security over the years. Over the last 3 years, we've not had a major incident around the country because of the vigilance that the security forces have been having, the setting up of the inter-agency task force that have been sharing information and have been coordinating better to secure the country has clearly worked. Now, this particular attack is an attack by a group, Al-Shabaab, which is clearly on its back foot. And apparently they chose the day today to mark their 3rd anniversary on the attack of the Kenyan troops in Somalia with the AMISOM in El Ade. And basically what they're trying to do is to, send a message that they are still relevant, that they can still attack, and that they are there.
All right, Dr. Mustafa Ali, you're a security expert, an international security expert. What's the best way for government to respond?
Well, first of all, the way the security agencies have been responding in the last 3 or 4 hours is laudable. They have mobilized the recce squad, the rangers, and various units to try and go and flush out those gunmen holed up still in that facility. And you can see that the emergency groups, Kenya Red Cross and others, are really on top of their game. They have been going in, coordinating with security agencies, saving and getting out the civilians that were trapped there, some of them injured. Now, what needs to be done basically is for the government, the security agencies to cordon off the place and to move in room by room and make sure that they flush out all the gunmen.
All right, Doctor, I'm sure as a citizen of Kenya experiencing such a horrific event, you would feel vulnerable. What can government do to make the people of Kenya feel more secure?
Well, the government has been reassuring the Kenyan public, and it's been working very closely with the Kenyan public through various strategies that have been developed. The national counter-violent extremism strategy, the counter-terrorism strategy, and by and large, the Kenyan population feels quite reassured. This kind of attack can happen anywhere. It can happen in New York, in London, in Paris, and so there is no need for alarm. Kenyans need just to remain, not to be terrified by this kind of an attack. It's one of those attacks. The Kenyan government and the security agencies are pretty much on top of everything.
And if a civilian is caught up in such a security breach, what should they do?
Yeah, the first thing they need to do is to make sure that they get into a secure room or find any route to escape. One of the things they need to do, if it's dark like now, is to switch off the lights, put their mobile phone on silent so that they can, if there is a terrorist or a gunman lurking around and somebody is trying to call one of their relatives or loved ones, they don't let out on the specific location they are, and then they can communicate with security agencies or their families, people outside there, to locate, to give their exact location at a place where an attack is unfolding. But by all means, do not tweet. Do not tweet where you are publicly, because the terrorists and gunmen can actually follow that and then locate where they are and harm them. Dr.
Mustafa Ali, international security expert, thank you for your insight and analysis. All right, moving on, CGTN's Jane Keo is at the scene of the attack, and she joins me on the line with the latest. Jane, thank you for joining us. Jane, reports indicate that at least one person has been killed in the attack. What is the latest from the ground?
Well, Richard, right now what we are hearing is that security agents, and this is the Special Record Squad, this is a special anti-terrorism squad, the Kenya military, as well as special American forces from the U.S. Embassy, are basically combing and sweeping through the entire complex. Actually, right now we're still hearing gunfire that's going on, but those are security agents that are sweeping and combing through the building, and that's the hotel and the adjacent building, to ensure that it's safe. From where we are, which is about 150 to 200 meters from the scene of the attack, it appears to be somewhat safe. We've not had the prolonged gunfire that we did in the last one and a half hours ago. So you can see the situation appears to be under control. But again, it's still too early to say, given that we're still seeing a lot of movement from where we are. What we know, like you mentioned, one person was killed. We still don't know whether this was the gunman. There are reports one of the gunmen blew himself up inside the complex. Again, we still don't have the exact number of these gunmen. What we know is that from the witnesses that we've spoken to, is that gunmen, they were said to be 3, some are saying 7, actually drove to the complex about late this afternoon. Their first victims were 2 university students, and this is because the hotel is adjacent to a hostel housing Nairobi University students. So the 2 students were their first victims. The first respondents, you'd say, were security agents who were manning the Australian embassy, which is about 100 meters from the hotel complex. But again, it's still too early. We still don't know. Al-Shabaab, yes, has claimed responsibility. We don't know what the target was. There's different kind of information that is flying around that perhaps they were targeting a group of American investors who are meeting next to the hotel complex. But again, that is yet to be verified. Richard?
And Jane, what is being done to secure the area? And is everyone now accounted for?
What we know right now, we're not really sure, because we don't have exact figures of how many people were inside the business complex or the adjacent building. This is a huge complex, remember, Richard. It houses different businesses. We're talking about restaurants, there's a bank, there are PR agencies, that's public relations agencies, plus the hostel that is housing hundreds of University of Nairobi students. So we don't have the exact numbers, but we've been seeing ambulances that are ferrying people who are still inside the building. We've also seen relatives who are still around the complex. They say they are communicating with some of the people who are still trapped inside the building. So for now, we cannot talk about how many people were inside, but we do know that the attack happened late afternoon during late lunch hour, business hour. So we can imagine there were many people, because that was during the business hours. But again, this is an incident that has evoked memories for Kenyans, you'd say. About 5 years ago, we had the Westgate Mall attack. Something similar. We've not had huge numbers. And again, like you mentioned, this is just 3 years since that El-Ad attack that happened inside Somalia, when they attacked the Somali Al-Shabaab militants ambushed Kenya military defense forces at their camp. So it's pretty a sad day. Let's see how it goes and whether the night will produce any kind of results or more information. Richard?
Jane Keogh, thank you for that update and report. We shall keep in touch as things unfold. In North Africa, Egypt has extended the state of emergency for 3 months. Terrorism is still a major threat in the country. The emergency state helps security forces to arrest and interrogate suspects without a prior judicial warrant. Here's Adel El-Marouki with more.
This week, Egypt has started another 3 months period of the emergency state. Parliament has approved the extension requested by the government as threats of terrorism persist. Security experts say the exceptional state of law is necessary for the country's fight against terrorism.
The state of emergency must continue as long as there is a possibility of a threat. Security forces would sometimes need to investigate with suspected militants. They cannot wait for a prosecution warrant. Immediate arrest is then crucial, and this diminishes the number of terrorists. If investigations prove otherwise, they are immediately released.
In the past 3 weeks, 2 bombs have targeted tourists and Christians in Cairo. And earlier this week, the Interior Ministry said 6 militants were killed near their desert shelter south of the country.
Terrorists are under siege. They cannot win this fight against Egyptian forces. Their attacks have become weaker. There are sleeper cells that appear anytime, so we must face it by all means and all required procedures. We can never expect the terrorists to disappear. We must always expect these groups to re-emerge at any time.
Despite the ongoing state of emergency, Egypt's stepped-up security has gained international recognition. In 2018, the number of tourists visiting Egypt has jumped by more than 50%.
The state of emergency has been imposed nationwide in April 2017 following bomb attacks against 2 Egyptian churches. Cairo has then launched a major counter-terrorism campaign and has been extending this exceptional state of law ever since. This is the 7th extension, and it seems that as long as terrorism threatens the country, it will not be the last. Adel El-Marouki, CGTN, Cairo.
In Zimbabwe, soldiers have been patrolling city streets as confrontations with demonstrators threaten to boil over. Banks, schools, and business stayed shut a day after protests over the country's deteriorating economy turned deadly. Several people died during Monday's unrest, which followed sharp fuel price hikes decreed by President Emerson Mnangagwa. All right, we cross now to Farai Wakatuya in Harare. Farai, thank you for joining us. It's been another uneasy day in Zimbabwe. What more can you tell us about this?
Well, uneasy indeed, also very unusual. You mentioned banks, shops and businesses staying shut. That meant that the central business district resembled a ghost town, virtually deserted. The only vehicles and people you saw in downtown Harare today were police vehicles and army vehicles, army personnel patrolling the streets to make sure that there weren't any incidences there. We also heard of those skirmishes and confrontations in some of the high-density suburbs, particularly as the army and police went into those areas to try and pursue and go after some of the perpetrators of the violence that was witnessed yesterday. Just a short while ago, the Minister of Information gave an update where she said over 200 people have been arrested in connection with that violence, and those people have been arrested and have been apprehended through these police and army operations. Also very unusual because there were challenges accessing social media and the internet here. People couldn't, from as early as 9:30 a.m., social media services, WhatsApp, Facebook, Twitter were down. Eventually, the entire internet was down. No confirmation from government if indeed they ordered this shutdown. However, many Zimbabweans couldn't access the internet or social media. We know in the past that government has blamed social media for spreading fake news, for inciting, violence in some of these protesters. So, that is something that was witnessed today and added, to the anxieties and the uncertainty around the country and around these protests that have taken over this country over the last couple of days.
And Farai, what measures are being put in place by the government to lessen the economic hardships being experienced?
Well, indeed, in that same update that the information minister gave over the arrest, she also mentioned that the president has agreed and given an instruction to provide a cushioning allowance to all civil servants. Civil servants have been clamoring for an increase in their wages. They are currently engaged in negotiations with government, and so far, those negotiations haven't yielded any fruit. But the president has said he is providing a cushioning allowance over the next 3 months, from January to March, for civil servants as those negotiations continue. That allowance is to try and cushion them from these price hikes that we've been seeing, also anticipated price hikes after this increase in fuel. On the issue of fuel, government is also providing rebates to registered businesses in transport, manufacturing, mining and agriculture, so that they can also be cushioned from this increase, 150% increase in fuel price, and so that they don't pass that on to the final consumer. So trying to avoid another round of price increases, which will obviously push up inflation that is already at a 10-year high. Those are some of the measures that have been announced in the interim. Long term, obviously, government is trying to come up with more investment, more projects that will inject life into this economy and get production going, create jobs, so that ultimately the economy gets back on its feet.
All right. Thank you for your insight analysis. That's Farai Wakatiya reporting from Harare. All right, time now for a short break. Here's what's ahead on the program. The International Criminal Court dismisses charges against former Ivorian leader Laurent Gbagbo. And day of reckoning in Parliament for British Prime Minister Theresa May's Brexit deal.
You don't find the stories of North Africa by sitting on the sidelines. You've got to get out, go there, and you'll find them. In the bazaars of Casablanca. Among the crowds in Cairo.
Who come to visit Cairo, the ancient capital of Egypt.
Along the waters of the Nile. Along the sands of the Sahara. No one else will take you where we can in North Africa. No one else will show you what it's all about. CGTN, see the difference.
Welcome back. In other news, former Ivorian President Laurent Gbagbo has been acquitted of all war crimes charges against him by the International Criminal Court. He faced 4 counts of crimes against humanity, including murder, rape, persecution, and other inhumane acts. This allegedly happened during the post-electoral violence in Côte d'Ivoire between December 2010 and April 2011. The court ordered his immediate release, saying the prosecution failed to present enough evidence linking the former leader to the alleged crimes. Co-defendants Charles Blagude, a close ally and former political youth leader, is also set to be freed.
The Chamber, by majority, hereby decides that the prosecutor has failed to satisfy the burden of proof to the requisite standard as foreseen in Article 66 of the Rome Statute. Grants the defense motions for acquittal from all charges against Mr. Laurent Gbagbo and Mr. Charles Blegude. Orders the immediate release of both accused pursuant to Article 81.
Earlier on, we spoke to CGTN's Jack Parrock from Brussels. He starts by telling us more details about the case and the ICC's ruling. Let's take a look.
Judges at the International Criminal Court have essentially said that the defence's claim that there is no case to answer for Laurent Gbagbo and his co-defendant Charles Blé Goudet, that should be upheld. They don't believe that the prosecution has brought enough evidence for the trial to continue. It hasn't even made it to the point where the judges needed to decide whether to convict or acquit. Halfway through this trial, they have decided to acquit Laurent Gbagbo. Now, there is still a chance for the prosecution to appeal, as they are doing, so Laurent Gbagbo will not be released until that appeal is completely finished with, until the judges have heard it and ruled on it, but it is expected now that this acquittal will be upheld. Essentially, they say that they don't believe that the prosecution has proved either that Laurent Gbagbo was inciting the post-election violence in 2011, 2010, after he lost the election in the Ivory Coast, and in fact, they're even saying now that perhaps there hasn't been enough proof to say that the crimes against humanity were committed by anyone. They're not saying that the 3,000 people weren't killed during that time, but not that the prosecution has provided enough evidence to prove that it was a coordinated crime against humanity attack. It certainly looks bad for the office of the prosecutor. There have been a number of high-profile acquittals. The case against the conviction against Jean-Pierre Bemba, the former vice president of the DRC, was overturned after he'd spent 10 years in The Hague. Also, the cases against Kenyan President Uhuru Kenyatta and William Ruto, his vice president, they were thrown out as well. So it is starting to look like the prosecutor is struggling to get enough evidence to take these trials all the way and get convictions, and even if they do get convictions, to uphold them. Now, for the case of Laurent Gbagbo, this is obviously politically expedient as well. He's a 73-year-old. He could go back and potentially re-enter political life in the Côte d'Ivoire against the man who beat him in those elections, Alassane Ouattara. Now, the judges of the International Criminal Court will say that actually these cases prove that they're independent and that they're impartial, that they listen to the evidence and that they follow the instructions that the evidence gives them. As I say, for the prosecutor it will be a very difficult night, and it will take a long look in the mirror for the next prosecutor, who's going to be elected within the year or so, to try and see how they can take these ICC cases, get convictions and get those convictions upheld.
A historic vote in Parliament has begun as British Prime Minister Theresa May faces the prospect of defeat on her Brexit deal, leaving the country in limbo about its membership of the world's biggest trading bloc. May urged lawmakers on Monday to take a second look at her deal, but Parliament appeared set to reject the agreement. The cabinet has shown support for Prime Minister Theresa May ahead of the Brexit vote. So far, she has refused publicly to speculate on a possible Plan B. Well, at the heart of the Brexit debate are two significant documents, the withdrawal agreement and the political declaration. The withdrawal agreement sets out terms of the divorce with the EU. The political declaration gives a framework for future relations with the bloc.
The 600-page withdrawal agreement is a legally binding document that sets out a roadmap for the 21-month transition period after Britain officially leaves the EU. It promises that during the transition period, the UK will stay in the single market and customs union. This ensures free trade and protects the interests of EU-UK businesses until final trade deals can be reached. The agreement also guarantees citizen rights. EU citizens in the UK and UK citizens in the EU will retain their residency and social security rights after Brexit. Citizens who decide to take up residence in another EU country during the transition period will be permitted to remain in that country after the transition. Another major article in the agreement is the Irish backstop, an insurance policy to avoid a hard border between the UK and Ireland. Northern Ireland will remain in a much deeper customs arrangement from the rest of Britain and will also be signed up to a number of EU single market rules and regulations on goods. Compared with the withdrawal agreement, the political declaration is not a legally binding document. It aims to define relations after the divorce. The declaration is criticized as worryingly vague by May's political rivals at home. Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn described it as 26 pages of waffle, which could have been written 2 years ago. Some of its points include the UK will respect the indivisibility of the EU's 4 freedoms, the free movement of people, money, goods and services. It also suggests technology can be used in avoiding a manned border in Northern Ireland. And one point of contention is that the European Court of Justice will have jurisdiction over future trade disputes between the two sides. Marke, CGTN.
And finally, we end the Brexit segment with a quick look at some of the key moments since Britain's voted to leave the EU 2.5 years ago. Let's take a look.
I think the country requires fresh leadership to take it in this direction.
Our proposal will create a UK-EU free trade area. But the collective decision of Cabinet was that the government should agree the draft withdrawal agreement and the outline political declaration.
This is the only deal possible. The only deal possible.
Let's go now to Uche for the latest business news.
Thank you, Richard. And here's a look at what's coming up on Africa Live Biz. South African gold production falls by 14% in November. And dwindling coffee prices raise concerns amongst Ethiopian farmers.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Well, let's start off in South Africa. The country's annual gold mining production contracted in November 2018 with a 14% fall. That's compared to November 2017. Now, the production decrease contributed to a 5.6% year-on-year decrease in the struggling sector, certainly signaling that it hasn't recovered from its slump. In addition to the contraction in gold, we saw iron ore production falling by 19.7%, and that, of course, is year-on-year. We also saw diamond production down 21.7%. Now, the three mineral groups together account for a third of the country's mining basket. Total mineral sales increased by 8% year-on-year. And staying in South Africa, the Minister of Finance tabled the carbon tax bill in Parliament late last year. He confirmed that the bill will become effective from the 1st of June in 2019. Now, that announcement comes after the carbon tax bill was delayed from 2015. And here's CGTN's Angela Coppola picking up that story.
This carbon tax bill has been several years in the making, and businesses have been concerned about the impact the tax will have on their profitability, given that they will be taxed at a rate of around $8 per tonne.
By implementing that at a rate which is quite substantial and which will increase with inflation every year, businesses will definitely be impacted in that they will be incentivized to source alternative sources of energy, alternative to fossil fuels, and they'll be encouraged to participate in carbon credit greenhouse gas reduction programs.
The carbon offset regulations have always also been published. That's also a big step forward, because it will probably not be fair to implement the tax without having the infrastructure for the relief mechanisms in place. And the carbon offsets is one of the important relief mechanisms.
The tax will be introduced in 2 phases, firstly to test the impacts and also in terms of ironing out any hiccups. Phase 1 starts in June and runs to the end of 2020, and it's intended to be revenue neutral by putting various allowances in place.
Companies that will have a tax obligation should already be doing the accounting for the tax. The next step would now be to calculate your tax obligation. The formulas in the bill are fairly complex, so it might take some time to sit down and read it slowly and figure out exactly what's happening and which allowances are available to which companies.
Once those are all accumulated, taxpayers will be granted up to a 95% reduction in their tax payment for that first period. Thereafter, the allowances will reduce and the tax payments will increase, and that will all balance itself out once we've had a chance to implement it slowly and over time.
The tax is part of a global effort to reduce the negative effects of climate change.
It is absolutely imperative that carbon does get priced into the economy. So even though new tax is painful, even though it puts a burden on the economy, I think the planet actually needs the medicine.
When this new legislation does come into place in June, it's going to have an impact, but hopefully it won't have an impact on consumers, except from a green perspective. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
And elsewhere in the country, the outbreak of the foot and mouth disease in Limpopo has had a devastating effect on trade. Now, the department has, however, moved to quickly quell those fears, saying that only a small amount of animals have been infected. Neighboring Zimbabwe and Mozambique have stopped importing meat as a precautionary measure. Here's CGTN's Yolisa Njamelo with the story.
The Agriculture, Forestry and Fisheries Ministry has allayed fears of the foot and mouth disease outbreak after a meeting with farmers on Monday.
We want to emphasize that this village of this is limited to Vembe district at Sonani village. The affected cattle is less than 50 in an area with about 10,000 to 15,000 cattle. The area remain under quarantine, and the vaccination process is beginning so that no further infections can occur.
Zokwana says the affected areas have been demarcated and fenced. A technical team has been set up to fight the outbreak. The team is made out of officials from the department and from the farming industry. A ban on importing meat products from South Africa was announced by several countries following the outbreak to minimize their risk of contracting the disease in their countries. The minister has admitted that the ban has caused a serious loss in the industry, but is confident that the disease will soon be contained.
We believe that we have got the ability as a country to do everything possible. We do have the manpower, we do have the way. Together with industry, we are on one voice. We need to save the industry. We need to make sure that the markets we have been doing trade with are retained.
South Africa's foot and mouth disease-free status was suspended after the disease was confirmed by a laboratory, and the matter was reported to the World Organization for Animal Health last week. The farming community has quickly moved to make assurances that the disease will not directly affect human beings.
FMD has no effect on human beings. There is no risk of anybody contacting anything. FMD is not transmissible to humans, so please enjoy your meat.
I think for the dairy industry itself, that could be a potential, there's a potential crisis at hand if it does get out of control. But at this stage, I think it's under control. The big thing is, it can be transmitted by milk, by fresh milk, but, pasteurized and ultra-high pasteurized milk actually kills the organism. So, with pasteurized milk and UHT milk, it can't be transmitted to human beings.
Foot and mouth is a severe, highly contagious viral disease which affects livestock with significant economic impact.
Farmers, the industry and the community at large have been urged to observe the measures in operation so that the disease is brought under control as soon as possible and everything returns to normal. Yolisa Njamelo for CGTN in Pretoria, South Africa.
Meanwhile, a slump in global prices has taken coffee prices to their lowest level in nearly 13 years. Now, in September 2018, the price of a kilogram of Arabica fell to just $2.09 per kilogram. Those, of course, are prices we've not seen since December 2005, and it is certainly less than a third of the peak in 2011. Now, these low prices are raising questions about whether it's worth growing coffee in traditional producers such as Ethiopia.
In the highlands of Ethiopia, coffee farmers are seriously thinking about calling time on an industry that has sustained families for generations. Unlike producers of commodities such as oil and natural gas, coffee farmers have long suffered from being at the wrong end of the value chain, receiving only a small fraction of the retail price of their crop.
The price of coffee has certainly gone down. However, we cannot stop growing coffee just because the price has gone down. We are not going to be lazy. Even the price of gold fluctuates on the international market, let alone coffee. It will go up at some point and then down at some point. That is just how coffee prices behave.
Over the past year, the amount farmers get for a kilogram of coffee beans has fallen by a third to just 29 cents, reducing their income from a cappuccino sold in the West for $3 to $4 to under a cent.
There is a heavy dissatisfaction among the farmers. They complain that they are not being fairly compensated for their effort. The price of maize today is 10 birr, while coffee is 10 birr. Coffee is being sold at a price lower than the maize. This is why the farmers are complaining and they are worried about the future.
If the price of coffee continues to fall like this, the situation will force the farmer to consider changing to growing other crops. So far, they have not done that because the government is subsidizing them by making different contributions, such as supplying coffee trees and providing training. We also tell them the future is bright. However, it has heavily affected the farmers' lives because the cost of living and their revenue is not matching at all.
But at the other end of the chain, coffee has never been hotter. Millennials in the West who grew up with Starbucks drink lots of coffee and have fueled a proliferation of coffee shops as well as innovations from cold brew to nitrogen coffee. The industry has also seen a wave of acquisitions as companies such as Nestle, GAB Holdings and Coca-Cola spent billions to boost their market share. For struggling farmers though, times are tough. Growers around the world have warned coffee company executives in the West of a growing social catastrophe unless they can help to raise farmers' incomes. Terry Wangari, CGTN.
Well, let's head to Tunisia now. Analysts are saying that the agriculture sector was hit by an unprecedented crisis since the 2011 unrest. Now, real estate development was the second most affected sector by the crisis. Some analysts believe that it's no longer safe to invest in real estate, which of course was the most lucrative investment in the country in 2010. Here's CGTN's Adnan Shaushi, who filed this report.
Over the past 8 years, angry farmers have staged many sit-ins and mass protests across the country to denounce their difficult situation, which has worsened since 2011. The crisis hit the sectors of meat, milk, egg, fruit and other agricultural produce. Protests continue as the country marks the 8th anniversary of the Tunisian Revolution.
Farmers have been neglected by the state. Farm bankruptcies are on the rise in 8 years. We are desperate. State subsidies are rare. Everything is more expensive in Tunisia, while farmers are impoverished. The situation is unbearable.
Experts assert that the real estate is also one of the most affected sectors by the economic crisis. Some 100 property developers have not sold a single unit in 2018. They have been calling on the government and parliament to reduce the value-added tax, which increased from 1 to 13% in the 2018 state budget.
The high VAT has paralyzed the real estate sector. The middle class's purchasing power is weak. It has plunged to alarming levels since 2011. Taxes have increased, the construction costs skyrocketed, and customers can no longer afford to buy small units. This housing crisis is unprecedented.
Tunisia's consumer defense organizations urge the authorities to intervene to find solutions to the crisis in the agriculture and real estate sectors. Experts believe that the middle class is slowly disappearing in the North African state.
Consumers and ordinary people are the ones paying a heavy price for the crisis which hit the economy since 2011. The government must act to stop this scourge. Otherwise, the situation will not improve in 2019.
Following a wave of protests by farmers and real estate developers, the Ministries of Agriculture, Trade and Finance called for dialogue. They have promised to find solutions in consultation with the syndicates and the professionals.
According to the National Institute of Statistics, farmers, real estate developers and construction professionals are the main victims of the socio-economic crisis which hit Tunisia since the 2011 unrest. The country's premier has recently called on citizens to work harder and to make more concessions in order to turn the page on 8 years of economic difficulties. Aden Shawishi, CGTN, Tunis.
And to the west of Africa now, in Mali, community radio stations are positively impacting many people, especially in the rural areas. The United Nations mission in Mali, MINUSMA, has enabled residents of remote parts of Mopti, which of course lies over 600 kilometers northeast of the capital, Bamako, to enjoy programs and be informed on what is happening in their midst and the world at large.
For 32-year-old Dynah Masake, working while catching up with the latest is a life he enjoys. Before radio stations were launched in Mopti, life was dull, but things have recently changed for the better.
The radio changes our lives. It makes us feel as part of a society. We can keep up to date with what is happening here, and we also get regional news, we get local news, and we also hear messages.
Ba is one of many residents of Mopti whose lives have changed thanks to the many community radio stations that can now reach Mopti. This was made possible by a UN mission operating in Mali.
As its name suggests, community radio's main goals are to provide information, awareness, civic education and community education.
Most of the stations based in the capital, Bamako, did not have the necessary infrastructure to broadcast in Mopti. However, the UN project invested millions of dollars under the Quick Impact project and made it possible for 9 radio signals to reach Mopti.
At the time, MINUSMA came to support us. Radios did not exceed the 60 kilometers range of broadcasting. From the moment we received an antenna to amplify our signal, it allowed us to reach our former listeners.
The program also enabled these stations to acquire the latest broadcast equipment and gadgets.
Radios are important because it is a tool to inform, a tool to educate. Through the radio, we can broadcast awareness messages to people who have taken up arms, people who are killing themselves, to bring them back to their senses.
Locals now benefit with entertainment and educational programs. They also catch up with news around their areas, other regions in Mali, and the world at large. This region has seen several clashes between the local Dogon community and the Fulani herders, and these stations have been instrumental in preaching reconciliation and the need for peaceful coexistence. CGTN.
Well, that's all for now on the Africa Live Biz. It's back to you, Richard.
All right, thank you, Uche. Time now for a short break. Third and final test match.
Africa, where champions are made, records are broken, legends are born. We're there for every goal, for every knockout, for every step of the way.
Match Point, only on CGTN.
Welcome back in Johannesburg for a series whitewash of Pakistan.